Welcome to AP Biology. Today I want to talk to you about local and long-distance signaling that happens in cells. And I want to start by talking about the similarity between the way we do that and the way prokaryotes do that, or any single-celled organism. So a signal transduction pathway involves a ligand binding to a receptor, and then there are these intracellular signal transduction that happens, which means you change something inside the cell, and then you get some type of a cellular response. And so that happens in our bodies, and it also happens between different yeast cell, and it happens between even different bacterial cells. So because this one can release a molecule that can be received by a receptor on a different cell. And because that happens with us too, we think that we had a common ancestor with yeast and with bacteria and with everything on Earth pretty much, because most cells on the planet communicate this way. So pathway similarities. The pathway means the chemical pathway, right? An enzyme changes A to B and another enzyme changes B to C and so on. Because there are similarities in pathways, this suggests that we have an ancestor between prokaryotes and eukaryotes who did that, who had some signaling pathway there where they had a ligand that attached to a receptor of another molecule that caused some change. So what I want to talk about today is local signaling and long-distance signaling. So local is going to be between cells that are right next to each other. Either they're physically connected or they're sitting very, very close to each other, whereas long distance could be the distance between your adrenal gland and your heart. So cells in a multi-celled organism can communicate by chemical messages and messengers. Animal and plant cells have these cell junctions that actually connect the cytoplasm of adjacent cells, cells right next to each other. So here would be an animal cell, a couple of animal cells. And this is really local, really close, because there's actually these spots where the cytoplasm of this cell is connected to the cytoplasm of this cell. I mean, they're different cells, but they're so connected that whatever's in here can flow right through to the other side, and vice versa. So like, let's say this is your cardiac muscle tissue. If this one is stimulated and it has the ions that stimulate it to contract, those can go right through to this next guy to make that one contract too. And that's actually how the heart coordinates itself. So it goes boom, 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 right? And so when the top contracts together, it's because all of the cells in the atria, in the top of the heart, are all connected to each other, and they're all getting stimulated together. And then there's a little delay, and then the bottom cells all contract together, because the bottom cells, the cells of the ventricles, those muscle cells are actually all connected. The name of the connection is a gap junction for animal cells. It means there's a tiny little space in the cytoplasm so that stuff that's here can go over here, and vice versa. Same thing with plant cells, except they have a cell wall. So their plasmodesmata is the name of the junction, the name of the connection between the two cells. And that is a longer tube because it has to get through the cell wall. So cells might communicate with each other locally or close by actually having physical connections between their cytoplasm. It's the coolest thing. So that's what this is, the gap junctions in animal cells. Or they might actually have something on the surface of their cells, where this one has something on its surface that can physically connect with a receptor. And so you see that connection right here. So that's direct contact. That would be cell-to-cell recognition. So maybe this is a skin cell that has all of these little knobby things here that say, hey, I'm a skin cell. And this cell next door recognizes it. And maybe there's another cell here and here and here, and maybe there's cells surrounding this cell. And so the skin cell says, oh, I have other skin cells all around me. I recognize them. I guess I'm done dividing. I'm going to be happy and stay put. But if this cell dies, then that's a trigger to say, hey, you know what? There's nobody over there. Maybe I need to do mitosis. And then another thing that can happen, let's say that this one has the wrong shape. Let's say it had a mutation and now it doesn't make the right shaped proteins or carbs on the surface anymore. And so now it doesn't recognize the guys next to it. So even though there's skin cells all around it, it doesn't recognize it anymore. And that's one of the mutations necessary for cancer. So the cell thinks it's not surrounded by other like cells anymore, and it just starts dividing. Other local regulators actually are molecules that are secreted out. So this cell might be secreting some molecule, and if this one has the right receptors for it, I'm drawing them too big, but if this one has the right receptors for this particular type of molecule, this particular ligand, then it will trigger this cell to do something. Maybe this cell's not a target cell because it doesn't have the right receptors on it. So notice that it's still local. The distance between this cell and this cell is very, very, very small. So they're not physically connected to each other with surface proteins or surface molecules, but they do only need a little tiny bit of diffusion to get from one cell to the other cell. And that's actually the way your neurons work. So these are neurons, or a neuron is a nerve cell. And so the impulse goes along this neuron, gets to the end, and then this vesicle releases a molecule called a neurotransmitter. So a neurotransmitter is a type of ligand, neuro for neuron, transmitter meaning to send information. And if this second cell, if this second neuron or muscle cell, whatever it is, in this case it's a neuron, if it has the right receptors for this particular neurotransmitter, then maybe it'll fire, maybe it'll get stimulated, or maybe it'll be told, hey, don't fire. You need to just be calm right now. So there are different neurotransmitters that you might have heard of. There's serotonin, dopamine, acetylcholine. You don't need to know the different individual examples, but I do want you to know the term neurotransmitter. It's a molecule or a ligand released by a neuron that affects some target. Could be another neuron. You'll see this term paracrine signaling. That's local, very local regulators. I don't think I really need you to know that, but I do want you to know the next slide. These are hormones which are part of the endocrine system. So endocrine system are glands and cells that release hormones. And so I do want you to know what a hormone is. In a human or in any animal with a circulatory system, a hormone is a molecule that's released by one cell and it travels through the blood to get to other cells to get to its target. So this is long distance signaling. It happens in plants and animals. Plants don't have a circulatory system, so that it happens by diffusion, so it's going to be slower. But with us, our hormones are released by one cell. They get released into the blood, and the blood travels through the whole body pretty quickly, within a couple minutes, right? And then all the cells in the body can have that hormone around, and only the cells that are targets, only the cells with the right receptors. This is my bad picture of a receptor, but only the cells with the right receptors can be affected by that hormone. So I want you to know the term hormone. It's a molecule released by one cell, goes through the blood if you're an animal and or an animal with a circulatory system, and it's affected by other. It's received by target cells. Okay, so the ability of a cell to respond to a signal depends on whether or not it has a receptor specific to that signal. So for example, let's say this is a cell of the adrenal glands. It's releasing epinephrine into the blood. The blood goes around the whole body, but the epinephrine doesn't affect skin cells. At least I don't think it does, because skin cells have no receptors for it. But cardiac muscle tissue sure does, and it's affected by epinephrine. The epinephrine tells it to contract harder. And the smooth muscle cells, maybe this is a smooth muscle cell in the bronchial tubes of the lungs. The epinephrine actually to the cardiac muscle cells, the epinephrine says contract harder. To the smooth muscle in your bronchial tubes in your lungs, it says, hey, relax, because you've got to open up those airways. So epinephrine is a fight or flight, a stress hormone. It says, hey, heart, beat faster, or hey, lungs, take in more air, which means your bronchial tubes have to open up more. Hey, smooth muscle in the iris, relax, because we need more light to get into the eye so we know what's going on. Hey, smooth muscle going to the intestines, contract, because we don't need to send blood to the intestines. We need to send blood to the brain and the heart and the lungs and the muscles. So the same ligand can have a different can cause a different response in one target cell compared to another target cell. And it might cause nothing at all in other cells that are not target cells if they don't have that receptor.